Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Soren. I am so glad that you are here today to join us for this session on virtual empowerment. This is a webinar that's part of the Strategies to Thrive series. The Strategies to Thrive series is something that is brought to you by the MAPP Alumni Association. I am very, very thrilled to be able to say that the MAPP Alumni Association is doing this extraordinary series where there are probably over 70, maybe 80 webinars that are either scheduled or have done. And if they're done, they are all recorded and findable on YouTube, covering a huge swath of the territory of applied positive psychology, and specifically often geared to how do we get through and not just survive, potentially even thrive through this little pandemic that we find ourselves in. So welcome. The topic that you are going to be hearing about today is about virtual empowerment. Virtual empowerment is, or empowerment itself, psychological empowerment is something that I did my capstone on, which basically means my thesis for the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program at University of Pennsylvania, which I did a while ago. So I think I wrote this initial capstone in 2013, but the research that it's based on is as relevant today as it ever is. And my hope with this presentation specifically is to try to challenge ourselves to think about how can we take what we know about empowerment and apply it into this context that we find ourselves in today. And specifically, what does it mean to create the context for people to have empowerment when they are working virtually? There are so many individuals and teams who are having to work virtually right now. So what does it mean to actually empower someone or to feel empowered yourself? And that's going to be the territory that we talk about today. I should say that I am myself an organizational consultant. I am the CEO of a company that's called Eudaimonic by Design. You can see in the bottom corner of your screen right there how you spell Eudaimonic by Design. And of course, you can get in touch with me. My email address is here, andrew@eubd.ca. Any questions you have, I will also make sure that these slides are shared. So if you're feverishly taking notes, don't worry, you'll be able to have them as well as other resources. So without further ado, I think I'm going to go and move on. And so I'll start with the fact that I came to the topic of empowerment because I was working for a bank. I was actually working for BMO Financial Group when I wrote my thesis for the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program. And BMO, like almost any organization that I have worked with since, it was constantly in search of the secret of high performance. And this was a mantra that I've heard again and again in all sorts of different organizations, certainly corporations, but also nonprofits in the government and other contexts, trying to understand what does it mean to be able to create the conditions where people can really perform at their very, very best, can be most productive, can get more results, can create customer loyalty. Those all were things that were important at BMO, as they are in many of the organizations that I've worked with since. And there was a question of, well, what does it mean? And there were a lot of people saying at the time, well, we just need to figure out a way to empower people more. And why were they saying that? Well, there was certainly, at least at the time, a hypothesis that empowering people would probably lead to results. And so one of the first things that I did as I was starting my own research was try to understand, well, what are the results of empowering people? And you can see on the screen right here that there's actually pretty significantly, these are two down at the bottom, meta-analyses, which basically means studies of studies that were done first in 2006 and then in 2011 that looked at, in organizational settings, when people quote unquote say they are empowered, what kind of results do they see differentiated from everybody else? And you can see they have significantly higher job satisfaction. They're much more committed to their organizations. They have less strain. There's less turnover. People do more organizational citizenship behavior, which basically means that they are better corporate citizens within the organization. They are more generous, more helpful. They're more effective. They're more innovative. Teams perform better. Financial performance as a result tends to go up. Generally, it seems that empowerment is a good thing, and many organizations are curious, well, how do we get more? Well, it turns out that there is a ton of research that has been done on this topic of empowerment. And about 30 years of research has been done on what it means to actually feel empowered. The work that I wound up looking at all comes from this realm of positive organizational scholarship or positive psychology or positive organizational behavior. These are all kind of sisters or cousin fields that start with the premise of how do we get more of the things that we want, as opposed to how do we solve problems. Everything that is in the Strategies to Thrive series is predicated on positive psychology. Some of the people that you see here, positive psychology is founded most notably by Martin Seligman. Here's also Csikszentmihalyi. Positive organizational scholarship, a lot of that work's done out of University of Michigan. We have Jane Dutton and Kim Cameron featured here, extraordinary folks. And positive organizational behavior, that is out of University of Nebraska. We have Fred Luthens and Carolyn Youssef as some examples of people from those fields, all of whom have looked at various levels into this realm of research. Almost all of the research I'm going to be talking about today, though, is actually driven by probably one of the most important researchers that I found most recently, also lives in this positive organizational scholarship world, and her name is Gretchen Spretzer. And so most of what I talk about today is going to be from Gretchen's work. But let's start with what is psychological empowerment. And this is a good question, certainly for any social scientist, to try to have a common definition of what we might be talking about. And so empowerment as a psychological construct has been studied since the mid-'80s, actually. Here's one definition: a motivational process that leads to the belief you can perform your work on your own. It might seem obvious, but I think that that's a really important thing to break down. A motivational process, it's something that's like inside of us. It's something that's kind of driving us, that makes us feel that we're capable. It's about a belief as opposed to something that you're actually doing or a feeling. This is a mindset, a belief. And that belief is that you can do work on your own. You can perform work on your own. You feel like you're capable of doing it. And so all of that is this bundle of what psychological empowerment is. And the research basically says that there's four major things that wind up adding up to this notion of psychological empowerment. One is meaning, two is autonomy, three is self-efficacy, and the fourth is impact. And for most of the rest of this presentation, I'm going to do a deep dive into those four things and specifically ask the question, how can we find those things now? Specifically, when so many of us are working virtually, and in this crazy context that we're in, how do we tap those things and bring more of this feeling that inspires us to believe that we can actually do work on our own? Okay, so let's start with meaning. The little pull quotes you see here are actually questions from a survey on psychological empowerment that Gretchen Spretzer put together in 1995. But meaning itself is defined as the way that you see your job and the tasks you need to accomplish fitting in with what you believe, what you value, and how you act in the world, right? So this is to a certain extent all of our North Star. And if you ask people at work, do you feel meaning? They would probably be answering questions like this: I think that the work that I'm doing is really important, or the work I'm doing is really meaningful for me, or the specific activities I do on a daily basis are meaningful to me. Those are some of the questions that kind of get at this meaning at work question. Now, how do you build meaning? Suspense. Well, there are at least four pathways. There's many pathways to be able to build meaning, but I'm going to take a page from one of my colleagues and friends, Emily Esfahani-Smith, who is a science journalist and has done a lot of work trying to kind of comb through all of the research on how do you build meaning. And she really talks about four major pathways to be able to build meaning. And so as you look at these, I guess I challenge you to think about, what would you do to build these things virtually? And please throw ideas into the chat as we do. I'll certainly be taking a look, and it would be just fun to be able to kind of do some group brainstorming here to a certain extent. But finding belonging. People who find a great deal of meaning at work feel that they really belong to a community. They feel valued and valuable within that community. And so as we are virtual, the work of trying to figure out who are the communities that we belong to and how can we be of value to those communities becomes even stronger as a key source to what it means to feel empowered, to feel this kind of motivational drive. One of the ways that people can feel belonging is harnessing their purpose. And purpose is really about that North Star, right? What are the things that kind of allow you to be your best? And how can you take the best of you, who you are, and be of service often to others? Purpose is almost always an other-focused thing. So that becomes a huge central aspect of what it means to build meaning. Storytelling is another massive part of what Esfahani Smith talks about in terms of how we construct meaning. So what are the stories that we tell ourselves, especially are the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening right now? We're constantly in this journey of being able to try to make sense of what's going on, the world around us, how we're showing up. And so as we are on our own, as we are going through the pandemic, as we are experiencing this, what are the stories that you're telling yourself, and how can you be even more aware of what they are? And then this last piece of meaning making is about looking for transcendence. And meaning is very tightly kind of connected to this notion of transcendence, and specifically this notion of awe. Awe, another way of talking about awe would be kind of finding extraordinary beauty, finding extraordinary excellence, potentially finding things that are scary, but that you can kind of wrap your head around. I mean, that sense of awe is a thing that we can really find meaning within. And when we think about work in a work context, looking for those transcendental moments in what we're doing, where we encounter something that's almost too big for us to be able to comprehend, and then find a way to wrap our heads around it, is this extraordinary way of building a real sense of meaning in the work that we do. I'm going to keep going on, but if you have other ideas for ways in which you can build meaning, I'd love to hear them. Second pillar is self-efficacy. Now, self-efficacy is this fancy word for the belief that you have the strengths, skills, knowledge, abilities, resources to do a good job. This is Thomas the Tank. This is, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, you know, climbing up the hill. That belief is a central part of what it means for someone to feel empowered. They might say things like, I feel confident in my ability to do the job. I feel like I've mastered the necessary skills to do my job. I'm self-assured in my capabilities. All of those things are about this belief that I can indeed do it. And there's 4 pathways to building self-efficacy. This work is the work of Albert Bandura, who is probably the most famous researcher on self-efficacy and has been researching it for decades and decades. But what he found is that all of us can find different ways to feeling that belief that we can. One is just by looking at what we've done in the past. What have you done before? And how can you remember those things and almost reteach yourself that, oh yeah, I was successful in the past, I can do this again. So what experiences that are not the same as this pandemic, or working virtually, or whatever you might be finding yourselves in, what are experiences a little bit like that I can reflect back on and try to remember, what did I do? How did I do it? How can I bring that back into this moment and help myself? Another one is about vicarious experiences or role models. And the guy who first taught me about self-efficacy, a guy named Gary Latham, used to talk about golf, right? Who's the person that you look to try to figure out who the right role model is for golf? It's probably, if you've never golfed before, it's probably not Tiger Woods. You really don't want to think about the best person who is absolutely a superstar. You probably want to think about your, Uncle Gary, who's like pretty good as a golfer and like spends a lot of time doing it and is like a much more accessible role model. So who are the right role models? The next one is about verbal persuasion. So who can you get to give you a little pep talk? right? That we can all have someone whispering in our ear, and often the people whispering in our ear are not always the most effective at building the sense of self-efficacy. So as we're virtual and we're thinking about who we're letting influence our thoughts, who we're letting talk to us and whisper in our ear, make sure that you're picking people who can actually help you remember that you can do this, or seek those people out and specifically engage them. And then the last piece of self-efficacy that's hugely important is about our physiology itself, the way that our body reacts to our emotions, to stress, to all sorts of things. One of the great things, and athletes know this probably better than anybody else, to be able to build self-efficacy is just by listening to your gut and really thinking, like, how am I in my body right now? And what can I listen to? How can I think about that stress in potentially good ways? What do I feel like I need right now to make sure that I can do it? Those are 4 pathways to be able to think about self-efficacy. I'm going to continue on. The next one's autonomy. Autonomy is one of the key pillars of this amazing theory called self-determination theory. And self-determination theory is really a theory about our psychological needs. We all have a deep-seated psychological need to be able to choose our own adventure, to be able to choose what we need to achieve and how we're going to go about doing it. This is work of Deci and Ryan and others. And as you can see, this is really about being able to decide how I do my work, making sure that people feel like they have autonomy in what they're doing and how they're doing it, freedom, interdependence, those kinds of things. So how do you build autonomy? There's really 3 paths to being able to build it. One is just by really being declarative about trying to find your own path, recognizing that almost any task that we have to do, especially now, especially in a virtual environment, especially in a context that feels very different than how we would normally do something, is an opportunity to choose. And that choice can be very, very liberating. So be very deliberate about choosing how you're going to be going about doing something. The second major way in which you can build autonomy is by working on your mastery. So thinking about the various kinds of practices that are around you, and trying to figure out, how can I get better at the thing that I'm doing? How can I really put in some deliberate practice to get better and better and better, whether that's about holding Zoom calls, or whether that is about writing something, or whether that's about even connecting with people that you love right now. In all of those contexts, those are potentially practices that you can get better at. And then the last one is around connection. So even though autonomy sounds like it's a solo sport, it doesn't necessarily have to be. So who might you choose to do something in kind of joint autonomy with? Who are the people that you choose to work with? Who are the people that you choose to be able to ask for help in this moment? Again, you being at choice and asking for the help creates a tremendous amount of sense of empowerment. Okay, the last pillar is all about impact. And this is really about how much of a difference, directly or indirectly, you believe you'll be able to make in the work that you're doing. And that sense of impact is a massive enabler to our capacity to feel empowered. It's not enough just to set up this condition where people feel empowered. You have to actually see that the work you've done has made a difference. And that becomes this feedback loop, this positive feedback loop that kind of reinforces, oh, I was able to do this, so now I can do it even more. That impact is the thing, to a certain extent, that builds the self-efficacy, that provides you with the opportunity to see the meaning in the work that you do, that reinforces that the autonomous ways that you've chosen to do something make a really big difference. And so how do you build autonomy, or sorry, how do you build impact, especially when you are virtual? These are true, I think, virtually or non. But Teresa Amabile wrote this incredible book called The Progress Principle in 2011 that talks about all of the ways in which we can show impact to ourselves. One of the ways is just about using your calendar in really, really deliberate ways, making sure that you're time blocking, maybe making sure that you're even changing the color of things on your calendar depending on how important they are, making sure that you stick to the things that you want to be able to stick to and get through those time chunks. All of that is about fundamentally increasing your focus in your work. The other great way that you can increase impact is by creating lists. To-do lists at the beginning of the day, got done lists at the end of the day. And if you're anything like me right now, those two lists are not the same. And both of them have great value. To-do lists help you in terms of setting intentions, but often in the course of our days, and especially in the course of our days in this environment that we're working in right now, what we actually wind up doing in the day often winds up looking fairly different. And there's all sorts of things that, that are important, that are part of our whole lives, that can get to the got done list, including things like dealing with our families and cleaning the things that need to be cleaned, or just being able to make time for some self-care. All of those things can be added to your got done list as well. The other major way that you can show impact, especially if you've got big projects that you're working on, is to break them down into much, much smaller pieces. It can be difficult to try to eat the whole elephant, as they say, but the way to do it is to take it one bite at a time. And so what are the ways in which you can break down bigger tasks into smaller tasks and then really celebrate when you've been able to achieve them? And so think deliberately about who are the people in your life who you are capable of celebrating with, who help you truly capitalize on the good stuff that you're able to be done, and find ways to just check in with them and really celebrate the impact that you're having. So those are the four corners of empowerment: meaning, autonomy, self-efficacy, and impact. One question that I found particularly interesting and have kind of dealt with again and again throughout the last decade of trying to apply some of this research in organizations is, what does it mean to lead an empowered team? And specifically, how do you facilitate empowerment? And that's an especially interesting question because there's a lot of research that says that managers really feel like that managers get in their own way of creating empowerment. And they do that for a good couple reasons. One is because they really believe that work done under specifically their supervision is better, even if the end result is identical. So this is a common bias that most managers have. And then couple that with the fact that most managers, again, unconsciously believe that work is better when they've had a hand in it themselves. Again, even if the product is the outcome is exactly the same. And so this, managers can really get in the way of creating empowered teams. So what do? Well, there's three really good ways of getting beyond that threat of empowerment. Especially if losing the control is threatening to you. One is just setting really clear limits and boundaries. What's the sandbox that you're asking your team to be able to play upon? And if you can all agree on what that sandbox is, then there's so much less possibility of things going wrong. The second is trust. If you have built a relationship of trust with your team, it will be very easy to be able to find ways to be able to empower them. But it's hard to build trust. And there's, I think, a lot of misperceptions about the ways that you can build trust. And the reality is, if you want to build trust with somebody, you have to start by extending trust to them. So if you've set boundaries and limits, how can you extend trust to allow people to be empowered? And then the third major, I think, extremely important thing to think about are the ways in which we measure and reward aligned goals. And so if everybody's rowing in the same direction, if you've exchanged trust, and if you've set up ahead of time, these are the things that we want to be able to achieve. And if you're successful, these are the ways that we'll measure that. And if you're successful, these are the ways that we'll reward that. If you're able to do that kind of performance management, empowerment is not threatening at all. Empowerment is actually something that is extremely liberating and very, very possible. All of those things, I should say, are even more important in the context of working remotely, when you can't see whether someone is being productive, when you can't see whether they're actually sitting and spending the time that you want them to be able to do. In those contexts, finding ways to again, create the sandbox, to extend trust, and to make sure that everyone's conscious of what are the goals and how are we going to measure and reward them, creates the conditions where teams can be far, far more effective without ever having to lay direct eyes on people. So that's it. I have talked a lot for 25 minutes. So I'm curious what questions you all have. I can see the chat. Jan's also going to be looking in there. But if you do have questions, this is a great time to ask. So I'm just going to pause. Maybe while you're typing your questions, I'm just going to do a quick plug for more of these strategies to thrive sessions. You can find them at this website right here, mappalumni.org, strategies to thrive. And then I'll also say that that we are putting together at Eudaimonic by Design a ton of resilience resources right now, all of which are available for free on our website, eubd.ca. So I strongly encourage you to go there and check out. Actually, we have resources about self-efficacy, about impact, about autonomy and self-determination theory, and about meaning. We have resources about all of those things and how you can build those in the context of today right now. Jordana, I see your question. One of the things that I found has worked well isn't just rewarding the outcomes, but also the behaviors, yes, that you want to see more of. I.e., if we've been working with someone and sharing their voice in a meeting and they share an idea, even if it hasn't been taken, I celebrate it. I think that that's a great point, Jordana, especially like the difference between process versus outcome goals. And especially right now in this context, sometimes, well, right now it can be hard to actually achieve, quote unquote, anything that we thought we might have. And recognizing those steps in the right direction and seeing the impact specifically of those steps in the right direction, I think is a massive part of it. You ask, how do you advise leaders to get out of their own head when they get stuck on the biases that they have in hand, particularly in stressful times? Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I'm curious actually what you've experienced, Jordana, because I know that you have a fair bit of experience in this field as well. I'll say that from my own experience, the best thing that I've found in terms of helping leaders think about it is actually just starting to help them shift their mindsets, and specifically getting to a mindset that my people are to a certain extent my competitive advantage, and that I can create more advantage by ultimately giving them the opportunity to be able to be more empowered. I think is a useful mindset shift, one that often doesn't come so naturally. So in my experience, it's kind of going back to these things, challenging some of these biases, you know, to ask people specifically to think about, you know, when has somebody done something? When has your team, a direct report, in other experiences, when has something been created that you never even could have imagined, that was so much better than what you could have imagined? To try to really help people reconnect to their past experiences to help challenge some of those beliefs.
That's great, Andrew. And we also have a question in the Q&A section. Would you like to hear that
Kendra.
now?
Yeah, sure.
Great. So Kendra Reddy asks, imagine if teams and organizations included these virtual empowerment cornerstones as KPIs. If this dream came true, how might we measure them?
That's a great question, Kendra. I think that I mean, in one answer, some of those questions that are kind of further back in these slides are in fact different kinds of, like, imagine if the average, you know, employee engagement survey actually asked these kinds of questions. And I don't know about you guys, but in my organizations that I've been part of in the past, a lot of the employee engagement, there often is an empowerment category, but the empowerment category is much more about, do people have the technology that they need to be successful? They're very rarely about these kinds of things, or about, do I feel like my job is meaningful, or do I feel like I'm able to go about doing my own work, or do I feel confident in my own abilities? And those are such really different questions, and I think that this gives a guidance for those who are constructing engagement surveys, a great way of being able to think about that. But I would say beyond that, finding ways as a team to have conversations just about these four corners of empowerment is another great approach to create the conditions where each individual team finds their own way of connecting about these things, of having team meetings or one-on-ones with people asking about these four topics. I think is another beautiful way to go. We have one more minute. Are there any last questions?
It looks like there's a question here from Max Cohen. Hi, Max.
Yes.
How do you foster
Hey,
a sense of autonomy while also needing to foster a sense of interdependence and systems for collaboration?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, well, as I said before, I think autonomy is so tightly nestled into this sense of relatedness. So we're constantly, I think, balancing this wonderful polarity between wanting to be able to do something ourselves and wanting to be able to do something in community. And I think recognizing that, that to be able to be of value to your community, to be able to be of service, to be able to feel like you belong, you need to be able to contribute. And so I think that the autonomy is ultimately about how can I best be of contribution to those communities, to the interdependent networks that I'm part of. That's my answer to the question, holding both of those things.
A good answer.
Thank you.
Oh, it looks like we have another question in Q&A. Andrew, from Elaine O'Brien. Hello, Elaine. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Hello.
So good. I want to be of value, but sometimes feel stuck. Today, another loss. My best friend's brother. I want to be of value, sending out care and love. What do you do if you feel stuck? You want to make those contributions, but you're feeling like you just can't get in gear.
This is a moment where I would turn to my friend Jan Stanley to answer a question like that. And since you happen to be here, Jan, how would you answer that question?
It's such a good question. Hello, Elaine, and thank you for sharing that. To me, I think the idea of reaching out, even though it's a time when we might be feeling stuck or overwhelmed, is for some of us, myself included, the tendency would be to retreat. And asking for help, reaching out, checking in with another friend might be just the motivational step that you need to take to really get yourself unstuck, or to really see, oh my goodness, the amazing contributions you could be making. And it ties to Andrew's talk about kind of self-efficacy, impact, etc. Sometimes reaching out and talking to someone else can get us unstuck.
Thank you, Jan. I am cognizant that it is 2 minutes after the bottom of the hour, so I want to thank everybody who has joined our call on Easter Sunday. Thank you so much for joining us today. If there are any questions that you have, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address is right there. And as I said, if you go to eudaimonicbydesign.com or ubd.ca, you'll be able to sign up for a whole bunch of resilience resources. Thank you, everybody who's joined us live, and thank you, everybody who is watching this as a recording. Have a great rest of your Sunday.